Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Please clear your desk by noon. That was the subject line. No greeting, no compassion, just a sentence that made my stomach drop before I even opened the message. It was 6:03 a.m. and I had barely sat down at my desk after taking 3 days off to bury my father. I blinked at the screen thinking it must be a mistake. But it wasn't. There it was in plain text. Approved leave or not. North Stream Cargo had decided I no longer aligned with operational priorities, whatever that meant. Shock came first, then the sting. 6 years of dedication, late nights, and missed holidays erased by an auto-signed message from my department head Harold Myers. The same man who had looked me in the eye just a week ago said, "Take all the time you need, Elena. Family comes first." He meant it until Monday's numbers rolled in. My name is Elena Moore. I'm 36. I was the senior operations lead for North Stream's Denver branch until exactly 1 hour ago. I used to believe that loyalty mattered in business, and that someone would notice if you worked hard and led with heart. I was wrong. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happened after. And I promise by the end you'll feel angry. But also triumph. And maybe even a little hope. Before we get into the details, please grab a cup of tea, turn up the volume, and don't forget to comment and tell us where in the world you are and what time it is in your local area. We want to know how far these stories go. I didn't respond to the email. I couldn't. My hands were trembling too hard to type, and truthfully nothing was left to say. I just sat there for a while, staring at the message like it might rewrite itself if I blinked enough. It didn't. So I shut down my computer, packed my things silently, and walked out without saying a word. What they didn't see, what they never asked about, was the 3 days I had just lived through. 3 days that felt like a blur of casseroles, condolence cards, and the impossible stillness of a home without my father in it. He passed away suddenly, a heart attack. No warning, no time to say goodbye. 1 minute he was here planning our fishing trip for next month. Next, I was signing papers at the hospital and calling my mom to say words I never thought I'd have to say. My father, Thomas Moore, wasn't just my dad. He was the kind of man who fixed things: leaky sinks, broken fences, shattered hearts. He served 23 years as a firefighter and never missed a birthday. When I was 7, he taught me to thread a fishing line and said, "Elena, life's like the river. It rushes past you, but the rocks stay steady. Be like the rocks." That voice echoed in my head as I stood beside his casket, trying to remember how to breathe. I didn't check my email that day. I didn't open a single work message during those 3 days. And maybe that's what they couldn't forgive. Harold had signed off on the leave with a tight smile and a rehearsed, "Take care of yourself." He didn't mean it. Because while I was lowering my father into the ground, they were already recalculating how to move on without me. I learned later that a junior associate, Harold's nephew, fresh out of business school, had suddenly been assigned to a new leadership development track. Strange how that opened up right after I left. But at the time, all I had was grief. Raw, unfiltered grief, and a box of my belongings in the back seat of my car. I kept thinking, if this is how they treat someone after losing a parent, how do they treat the people who stay? And still, I wasn't ready to fight back. Not yet. I wasn't angry, just hollowed out. But that hollow space, it had room to grow something. Something quiet. Something steady. And I remembered my dad always saying, "You don't need to chase the current. You need to hold your ground." What I didn't realize then was that North Stream had made a mistake. A quiet, devastating mistake. And soon they'd feel the ripple of it. Not because I raised my voice, but because I chose to rise. Word had already spread by the time I stepped out of the elevator that morning. I hadn't planned on anyone knowing. I thought I could pack up and disappear quietly like someone erasing their name from a chalkboard. But when I reached my desk, Melinda from accounts was already standing there, her brows furrowed, eyes darting between the half-filled box on my desk and the email printout in my hand. "Elena, what happened?" she asked, voice low but urgent. "I've been let go," I said, folding the email and tucking it into my coat pocket. The disbelief in her face was mirrored tenfold as more of the team filtered in. Jay, our logistics analyst, stood still as if trying to replay a conversation in his head to find where this could have been predicted. Carl, who rarely showed much emotion about anything, looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. "But you just finished streamlining the Salt Lake route," Jay said. "That saved us nearly $200,000 last quarter, and the safety compliance dashboard, you built that from scratch," Melinda added. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The absurdity of it was loud enough on its own. And then came the quiet details, the whispers, the puzzle pieces. Carl leaned in and said, "You didn't hear this from me, but Harold's nephew Brendan was sitting with the leadership dev group last week. Word is they're fast-tracking him." Something clicked. It wasn't about my absence, it never had been. They were clearing space. And losing my father had given them the moment they needed. What they didn't anticipate was the ripple effect. Loyalty, as it turns out, runs deeper than they thought. These weren't just colleagues. They were people I had spent birthdays with, stayed late helping prep presentations held together during product recalls and client meltdowns. And now they were looking at me with sympathy and a kind of protective fury. Elena J. said quietly, "This isn't over?" I gave a half smile, tired but grateful. I didn't have a plan yet. I didn't even have a direction. But I had something better. 7 people who knew what happened and weren't willing to forget it. At that moment, something shifted in the air between us. Not outrage, not strategy, just quiet solidarity. And solidarity, I would soon learn, can move mountains. Even when built in silence. The next morning, my inbox pinged with a name I hadn't seen in over a year. Clara Rodriguez. She was the chief operating officer at Swift Path Logistics, a firm known for innovation fast pivots and treating people like more than cogs in a wheel. We first met at an industry summit in Portland. I was speaking on crisis response systems. She was moderating a panel. Afterward, she pulled me aside and said, "You've got a mind for structure and a heart for people. Call me if you ever want to work somewhere that values both." At the time, I had smiled, flattered but firm. I was committed to North Stream. I believed in building things from within. I thought of Harold. That felt like a lifetime ago. Now her email was brief, but every word hit with precision. "I heard what happened. It shouldn't have. If you're open to it, I'd love to talk. We have a leadership role opening in our Seattle branch, which is fast-growing and high impact. You'd be perfect for it." I stared at the screen for a long moment, heart-pounding. I hadn't even begun looking for another job. Part of me was still tangled in grief and shock. But another part, the steadier part, knew an open door when it appeared. We set up a call that afternoon. Clara's voice was warm, clear, and unhurried. "I won't ask for details," she said gently. "But I want you to know we build around our people, not above them. I've been trying to get you on board for a while. I wish it were under better circumstances. It felt surreal speaking to someone who didn't see me as a burden or a liability, but as an asset, a partner. I hadn't felt that in months." The role was compelling, Director of Operations Pacific Northwest Region. It offered more responsibility, more autonomy, and most of all, a place where I could lead without looking over my shoulder. But one problem lingered. I told Clara about the non-compete clause North Stream had made me sign, 6 months, 500-mile radius airtight language from their legal team. Clara paused for a beat. "Our legal counsel can take a look. We've dealt with those before. They're not always as enforceable as they sound, especially in cases like yours." It wasn't a yes yet. But it was enough to feel the ground under me again. Enough to feel like maybe I wasn't done building. After the call, I stepped outside. The Denver air was crisp, the sun cutting through winter clouds. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was carrying something heavy. I felt like I was moving towards something new. And something better was already reaching back. The next step wasn't glamorous. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, and I sat in a small law office above a coffee shop downtown, waiting for someone who could make sense of a contract I had signed years ago, without thinking I'd ever need to challenge it. Maxwell Trent wasn't what I expected. He looked more like a literature professor than a corporate attorney, round glasses, corduroy jacket, soft-spoken. But he had a reputation. My friend from grad school, now in HR at a tech firm, said Max had helped 3 of their engineers get out of impossible non-compete clauses. I handed him the North Stream paperwork, the original contract, with the highlighted paragraph that had been giving me anxiety since my call with Clara. Max read silently for a long while, occasionally underlining something or scribbling a note. Finally, he looked up and said, "This clause is overreaching. 6 months and 500 miles. For someone who wasn't even in executive strategy, courts usually don't like this kind of blanket restriction, especially after a no-cause termination. But I signed it, I said quietly, still uneasy. Doesn't that count for something? He smiled, kind but firm. It counts. But contracts aren't sacred. They're scrutinized, especially when one party is clearly in greater power. You were let go for taking approved bereavement leave. That context matters, Elena. A lot. Something was steadying about the way he said it. The ground under my feet wasn't as shaky as I'd feared. Max explained that non-competes had to be narrowly tailored and protect legitimate business interests in Colorado. North Stream would have to prove that my move to Swift Path posed real measurable harm, and even then judges often sided with the employee when there was a hint of retaliation. Then he leaned back and said something I didn't expect. Honestly, if you wanted to challenge this, we could make a strong case not just to nullify the clause, but to bring a wrongful termination suit. I shook my head. I'm not looking for a fight. I want to move on. But safely. Then we'll prepare a response if they push back, Max said. And in the meantime, you have more room than you think. When I left the office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, like someone had handed me a map just when I thought I was walking blindfolded. The path ahead wasn't easy, but it was visible, and sometimes that's all you need to start walking. 2 days after I met with Max, I started getting messages. They were quiet at first, a ping here, a missed call there, but then they came all at once. Elena, where did you save the Henderson freight model? Do you know who had final access to the compliance audit folder? What did you name the backup file for the Q3 forecasts? The tone was always the same, confused, rushed, and panicked. I recognized the feeling. It was the exact storm I had managed through for years. Only this time I wasn't there to steady the sails. Jay finally texted late Thursday night. The whole system's falling apart without you. Nobody knows what's where. Part of me wanted to feel smug, but mostly I just felt sad. I had poured everything into building structure systems, training guides, naming conventions, and still none of it worked without someone who understood the logic behind it. Then Melinda called. Brendan's leading the team now, she said, her voice laced with disbelief. He froze up today when a client asked about inventory routing. Jay had to step in. I could picture it. Harold's fresh-faced and over-eager nephew suddenly realized that theory didn't teach you how to talk down a logistics manager 2 hours before deadline. They had replaced experience with proximity, and now the cracks were widening. Have you accepted the Swift Path offer yet? She asked after a pause. Not officially, I replied, still working through the legal. Well, so that you know people are talking. And not just our team. Words are traveling across departments. The Hendersons asked for you by name during a client call. That last part landed harder than I expected. Clients remembering me and asking for me. That mattered more than any number on a spreadsheet. A few hours later, I got a message from Clara, just a single line. Any thoughts since we last spoke? I stared at the screen. Then slowly typed back, if I come, I want to bring my team. It was bold. It could be too bold. But if this next chapter was mine to build, I wanted to do it with the people who had built everything beside me. The reply came quickly. If they're half as capable as you, I want them too. Let's talk next steps. It was still uncertain, it was still early. But one thing was clear, the storm inside North Stream wasn't just weather, it was a warning. And I wasn't the only one reading the signs. We met at the little coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment, the one with the mismatched mugs and creaky floors that smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso. I'd picked it on purpose. Quiet, out of the way, the place where no one wore a North Stream badge or asked too many questions. Jay arrived first, followed by Melinda, Carl, and the others, and then we had to pull 2 tables together to fit everyone. Seeing them all in one place without our usual office background felt strange. No whiteboards or spreadsheets, just jackets draped over chairs and hands wrapped around warm mugs. They didn't make me wait. "We've already applied," Melinda said, pulling out her phone and showing me the confirmation email from SwiftPath's career portal. "Yesterday," Jay added. "Right after your message." I looked around the table. Every face held the same expression, calm, confident, ready. It wasn't a rebellion. It was clarity. "You all have good positions?" I said carefully. "Decent salaries, benefits. Walking away from that isn't easy." "It's not about being easy," Carl replied. "It's about knowing who's worth following." There was a pause. Then Jay added, "If they can do what they did to you, Elena, what makes us safe?" It struck me then that what started as a personal loss had become something bigger. This wasn't just about me. It was about a team tired of being treated like placeholders. A team that had watched someone they trusted get pushed out and realized maybe for the first time just how fragile corporate loyalty could be. I can't promise anything, I told them. Clara's willing to talk, but the hiring process must still be fair. "We're not asking for favors," Melinda said. "Just the chance to work somewhere that doesn't punish decency." They were all in. Fully. Not just with resumes, but with conviction. And as we sat there finishing the last sips of our coffee, I realized we weren't walking away from something. We were walking towards something else, something built on trust, not titles. The next morning, Paula called me. "I've just received 5 resignations," she said. "All from your former team. All effective immediately." Her voice was tight, carefully measured. But underneath it, I heard something I hadn't before. Fear. Because now it wasn't just one name missing from the Monday call list. It was all of them. And suddenly silence was no longer compliance. It was the beginning of a shift they couldn't control. It was barely 9 a.m. when Paula called again. I hadn't spoken to her since the day I was let go, and even then it had been a polite, distant exchange. But now her voice had changed. There was an edge to it, like someone trying to stay calm while holding back a fire. "Elena, we need to talk." I was standing in my kitchen pouring coffee. The sunlight hit the counter just right, warming the ceramic cup in my hand. Funny how even in moments like these, life insists on continuing as usual. "I've received resignations from 6 of your former team members," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "All of them within 24 hours. I assume you know why I took a slow breath. I didn't ask them to leave. I didn't even suggest it. But they're all going to SwiftPath," she pressed. "They made their own choices, Paula. Maybe ask why they felt the need to make them." There was a pause on the other end, and when she spoke again, her tone had softened just slightly. "We're prepared to make things right, Elena." A formal apology. Your old position plus a 15% raise. It might have sounded generous to someone else, but to me it just felt late. "You want me to come back to fix what Harold broke," I said. "But you didn't stop him when it mattered. I was out of town when he made that call," she replied almost defensively. "He acted without consulting me. Then maybe that's the real problem?" I could almost hear the silence build between us. "Elena," she said again, gentler this time. "What would it take?" I looked out the window at the street below, people walking dogs, sipping coffee, talking about things that didn't involve betrayal or boardrooms, and I realized I didn't want anything from North Stream anymore. It would take time travel, I said. To undo the moment your leadership decided grief was a liability. She didn't respond right away. Maybe she knew there wasn't a good answer. "I've accepted the offer from SwiftPath," I added. "We start Monday." Her voice turned cool again. You're still under a non-compete, you know. Our legal teams can sort that out, I said. But I think you'll have more pressing issues soon. When I hung up, I didn't feel vindictive. Just free. The door had closed, not with a slam, but a final quiet click. And this time I was walking through one that opened on my terms. Monday morning came with clarity I hadn't felt in months. No dread, no forced smiles. Just a quiet, steady anticipation. The Swift Path office in Seattle wasn't flashy. It was open bright, filled with real plants and real laughter, small things, but they spoke volumes. Clara greeted me at the door herself. "Welcome home," she said, and for once it didn't feel like a corporate line. The first few days passed in a blur of onboarding and orientation, but what struck me most wasn't the process, it was the tone. Every meeting began with a question that still felt radical after years at North Stream. What do you need to do your best work? And the team came with me just as they said they would. Jay joined as senior logistics lead, Melinda took over client operations, and Carl stepped into process innovation. We weren't just filling roles, we were replanting roots. Within 2 weeks, our team introduced a simplified tracking system that cut response times by 30%. By the end of the first month, we'd closed a logistics gap that had plagued the Northwest region for 2 quarters. And when the Henderson account officially transferred to Swift Path, the client's rep sent a note that said, "Glad to be back with people who know what they're doing." But the part that moved me most was watching my people thrive. Carl, who used to speak barely in meetings, now leads weekly brainstorming sessions. Melinda launched a mentoring circle for junior analysts. Jay, always steady, helped rewrite the emergency response protocol that became the new company standard. We weren't just rebuilding. We were reimagining. One afternoon, Clara pulled me aside. "You didn't just bring a team," she said. "You brought a culture, one we needed more than we knew." Walking home under a slow-setting sun that night, I thought of my dad. I thought of the river he loved, and the rocks he always pointed out. "They hold steady," he used to say, "no matter how fast the water moves." And that's what we had done. We didn't fight the current. We didn't burn anything down. We just stood steady long enough to build something better. And the best part, we weren't done yet. 3 months into my new role, I received an envelope. No return address, just my name in clean, familiar handwriting. Inside was a small box, and in it was my old office nameplate from North Stream, along with a note written in blue ink. Thought this belonged with someone who earned it. B. Barbara from HR. That same week, a quiet article made its way around the logistics trade networks. North Stream announces internal restructuring following leadership review. No mention of names, but I didn't need a byline to know what had happened. Word was Harold had been let go. Paula stepped down a month later. The board brought in a consulting firm to evaluate the company's culture, citing unexpected turnover and key account losses. I didn't celebrate. Not really. It wasn't about revenge. But justice has a way of arriving without applause. At Swift Path, our team continued to grow. We were assigned 2 new regions, onboarded 3 clients from our former portfolio, and launched a pilot mentorship program. And then one crisp fall morning, Clara walked into my office, her expression unreadable. "You've been requested for the executive board presentation next quarter," she said. "They want to hear directly from you." It was surreal. I, someone who once got fired via email for attending her father's funeral, was now trusted with shaping the company's vision. After the presentation, Clara caught up to me near the elevators. "You should know something. Your name was floated for VP Pacific Division. Nothing official yet. But it's real." I nodded, not because I expected it, but because I was finally in a place where that kind of recognition came from merit, not politics. Later that night, I took a walk down by the Sound. The air was crisp, the kind that carried memory. I sat on a bench overlooking the water and reached into my bag, pulling out a small photo I kept tucked in my notebook. Me and my dad, fishing poles in hand, grinning like we hadn't a care in the world. "You were right," I whispered to the stillness. I didn't need to crash the system. I just needed to build something better. The current below me moved fast, but the rocks beneath it stayed still. So did I. And if this story reached you at a moment when you're standing at your edge wondering what comes next, hold steady. The river moves, but you don't have to let it take you. Before you go grab a cup of tea, turn up the volume and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? We want to know how far these stories travel.